I spent 650 hours with the finals for its platinum and subsequent review, and I was eventually overcome with this not so surprising urge to finally play a shorter game. And thus, for all the same reasons people disliked it back in 2015, The Order 1886 was a game I needed to play again in 2025. The Order is sort of unique in 2025. Sure, it is a linear, narrative, single-player, over-the-shoulder third-person shooter. It feels like we've played a million times. But what's unique is it released in this fully fledged experience, which is rare these days. No DLC, no season pass, and no empty roadmap promises. In many ways, The Order is frozen in time because so much of that finished product from 2015 is identical now in 2025. And its cardinal sin of having a short runtime of around 6 to 7 hours now actually feels more like a reason to buy it than a reason to avoid it. And I want to talk about why. The Order takes place in 1886 London, with a very different history than our own. You play as Sir Galahad, a veteran in the Order of Knights, the same order once led by King Arthur centuries prior. Their collective duty was to protect their world from half-breeds and lycans for centuries. Their duty was made easier by the discovery of the Black War, a mythical liquid that extends their life well into the centuries. Despite this discovery though, those centuries were filled with overwhelming losses for the Knights and humanity pushed to the brink of annihilation. That is until the Industrial Revolution arrives, a time period that sees a young Nikola Tesla with his inventions of thermite rifles, arc lightning blasters, and other twists on 19th century weapons used to finally push the Lycans into the shadows once and for all. What a premise, what a time period, what a set of characters to play with, and yet the game starts with so little of this told or expressed to you as the player. And to make matters worse, Sir Galahad and his team of knights are knights at a time when they are the hunters, not the hunted. The world is fine, the world is put together, they're merely walking through it. When the typical enemy you encounter throughout most of the game are rebels with a conspiracy against the Empire. Not half-breeds, not lycans. That takes a team of knights, superhuman knights at that, with every ounce of Tesla-inspired weaponry to fight tooth and nail to take a single one down. When you hear people talk so romantically about this game, myself included, they're rarely ever reflecting on anything from The Order 1886 and its final product. Not the final story told, the mechanics, the gameplay loops, and even the characters to a certain extent. The reflection from almost everyone that has ever played The Order is merely what could have been with a sequel. But for the price of a large coffee, I got 2 evenings of game time, a platinum trophy, and a trip down memory lane. And I only came away feeling more critical and cynical at the price of coffee than anything The Order had to offer. So let's ask the question, should you buy The Order 1886 a decade later? In short, yes. Let's talk about why. I want to start by saying it would be unfair of me to say the game's short runtime was the only criticism. That would be a limited criticism, and while these types of should you buy reviews can often soften the edges of a launch-jacket game or a specific feature or gameplay loop, some of those things are still worth a mention because you're still spending your time and money. The biggest fault for me with The Order is actually its gameplay at times. You're heavily carried by its breathtaking cinematics, but with nothing more than mild exploration and shooting galleries to split everything up. The presentation, the setting, the acting, the voice actors, the technical ability of Ready at Dawn's engine all rightfully faced zero criticisms from players and critics alike, both now and in 2015. But the moment-to-moment gameplay is maybe 60 to 70% of that already short runtime. And these moments are lacking in imagination, in gameplay depth, and there's never, if rarely, glimmers of innovation outside of the technical. That's not to say it's all bad, just to say I certainly understand the criticisms of the gameplay both now and back when it released. But these reviews are supposed to focus on the now, and the value of buying a game later. So I personally found The Order's simplicity enjoyable, and you're going to find out why throughout this review. The character movement and weapon handling felt great to me, but it's those bigger moments that genuinely fell short of any player expectation. When you do eventually encounter half-breeds, they devolve into these telltale-like QuickTime events in these tight, locked-off spaces. But for some reason, I just didn't hate it. Just like I didn't hate it in nearly all of the Uncharted games, which is my favorite franchise. It wasn't innovative for either franchise, but The Order manages to lean on its cinematic qualities to make it work. At least for me. I say this with an incredible amount of bias as well, not only the Uncharted elements, but I am not good with horror. Not at all. So this creature from hell being constrained to a QuickTime event in a locked-off camera was absolutely fine for me, but I totally understand the criticism from players who wanted more from these encounters, whether it be just gameplay or they wanted those genuine horror elements that we were initially promised. One big miss I think everyone can collectively agree on is how the Lycan fights play out narratively and systemically in the world. These monsters are supposed to rip through hordes of humans and knights with relative ease. We know that even with the Blackwater and Tesla weapons, knights struggled. Yet every fight in the actual game sees you in a standoff, one knight, one Lycan. It pulled me out of the experience every single time. I wanted to see the struggle. Essentially, this condensed symbolic fight for humanity with every single encounter. And it's a shame because one of the unsung heroes of the Order is its supporting cast that gets very little screen time. Lady Igraine, Lafayette, and Sir Percival are all brilliant. It would have been great to see more character development with these encounters being the catalyst, showing the impact of a close personal fight for your life against all odds, and what that does to a person that's lived for centuries without ever seeing a Lycan or a fight like this. This would have gone a long way to connecting me more to this world and to my team, but it constantly tried to split me up from them at every single turn. What ultimately happens is they start to feel like set dressing instead of knights I've fought with for centuries. And this is what Sony's other big hitters back then and now managed to do exceptionally well. The Last of Us, God of War, and Uncharted show you growing closer to your companion over time through a shared experience or trauma. With a little more development time, ironically, I think this is exactly what we could have gotten, but there it is again, cropping up. The Order is strange to me because I think there's a contradiction when people comment on the runtime of the Order. It's made to seem like it simply steals 6 to 7 hours of your time. That was the criticism back then, and I know people have softened on it now, but it really does give you a lot for your time. It doesn't steal anything from you. For your brief time with the game, you're exposed to a beautifully realized world, the best rendition of London in any game ever, and one of the most interesting alternative timelines in all of media, for me. Compelling characters from top to bottom, regardless of how well they're used, a nod to a grander story if we ever got a sequel. The game has it all, it has the building blocks, there's just not that many layers to it in such a short amount of time. The Order does more though. It does more with its 6 hours than some games manage to do with 40, 50, or even 60. To improve on that runtime, Ready at Dawn ironically needed more time. This was their first original IP, the first time on major hardware, and their first break from the PSP and the Vita world. The Order was in development by a reasonably small studio for 4 years while building what would turn out to be an industry-leading engine for a short amount of time. To me, this is such a fascinating part of Sony's history because I think they've really dropped the ball here. They never acquired Ready at Dawn as a studio. This was a second-party deal. A studio that I believe could have sat next to Naughty Dog and Insomniac in Sony's crown. Ready at Dawn produced brilliant work for nearly a decade on the PSP and Vita with some of the best God of War you could play, and even then, after they stumbled with the Order, their response wasn't to hide away, their response was to make some of the best VR games you could possibly play. I would love to make an entire video about this on how Sony screwed up. I think Ready at Dawn's closure should be met with the same outcry that Tangleworks saw last year. There's a collective shadow over the Order, and it comes in the form of Metal Gear 5, Bloodborne, Witcher 3, and Arkham Knight. It's that year, it's 2015. The consumer climate at the time wanted bigger worlds, bigger stories, more hours with franchises we already knew and loved, and we finally had the hardware to realize it. The Order, by contrast, isn't really comparable to anything in 2015, both good and bad. Oddly, while writing this, my closest comparison was Gears of War 1. At a glance, the gameplay loops aren't that different. Your weighty, superhuman-like character banging against walls, firing big guns over cover to a token onslaught amount of enemies, only to wall bounce your way to the next cutscene to progress the story. I wrote a whole section about it, then I realized that I'm old, time bleeds together, and the distance between this review and the Order's release is almost identical to that of Gears of War 1's release and the Order in 2015. I don't think there is a more damning and definitive way to frame how outdated the gameplay must have felt in 2015 for everyone reviewing it. Regardless of how phenomenal the game looks or the world it's building, the moment-to-moment stuff is going to be quite bland for some, and I don't think that ever gets away from it. Ironically, the runtime is what saves the Order. You're long finished with it before the gameplay ever becomes problematic or dull in 2025. I think I should actually address pretty clearly why I think 6 to 7 hours is a good deal in 2025. I've touched on it a little bit, but I'm going to end this video by explaining exactly why. Life is difficult. Regardless of your age or background or whatever you do, however long you play video games, be it 1 hour a week or 100 hours a week, the last few years have been tough with life for a various amount of reasons. And if you're watching this video, I just have a strong amount of empathy. Like, I've been playing more games in recent years, and that's a privilege. I don't blame you if you want to treat gaming as just pure escapism, and that's what it's meant to be. Tackling the most recent 40 to 50 to 60 hour adventure isn't escapism for some. I even struggle with it. Like, I don't want to sit down with God of War right now because I know it's like 40 to 50 hours long. It's a chore at times. It's one of the reasons why people lean so heavily into games they're so familiar with. Warzone, FIFA, Apex, Valorant, League, GTA, CS, Fortnite. Like, you've all got that type of game. Right now, it's probably Marvel Rivals for some. They are the gaming equivalent for fast food. Cheap, approachable, accessible, and absolutely familiar to every single one of us. That said, with its phenomenal graphics that still, surprisingly, somehow still hold up after a decade, its bare-bones gameplay and really short runtime, the Order 1886 just manages, even with its flaws, it feels approachable, accessible, enjoyable, and something that I think everyone should give a chance. When you finish this game, I think you'll find yourself joining the masses of people who want to see a sequel even a decade later. I think you'll see exactly what I and everyone else see, a franchise with a colossal amount of potential from a studio punching way above its weight. And for the sake of a coffee and a few hours of your time, I can't think of a better game to buy right now, even if it's just to cleanse your palate for another needlessly long 40 to 50 hour game.